The fluorescent light sliced through the execution chamber like a cold blade. White walls, low ceiling. The only sound was the gentle clinking of the IV line, swaying to the rhythm of a heartbeat. Not Elias Kane's, but that of the trembling technician holding the syringe. Elias lay strapped to the gurney, leather restraints crossing his chest, wrists, and ankles. An IV line was already inserted in his left arm, the fluid dripping steadily, ready to carry the final substance into his veins. On the wall, the clock ticked down each second with merciless precision. 9:58 a.m. Just 2 minutes left. 2 minutes for an entire life. His face was gaunt, eyes sunken as if he'd carried centuries of sorrow. But in this final moment his eyes were strangely bright, not with hope, not with belief that justice would prevail, but with one final image he chose to hold on to, not the courtroom, not the prison, not the betrayal, but the eyes of a dog. Ranger, a German shepherd with charcoal gray fur, ears always alert, as if listening to the whole world, but choosing only to hear Elias's heart. "Warden." The quiet voice pierced the stillness. "Any final words, Mr. Kane?" Elias closed his eyes. His chest rose and fell with slow breaths. He didn't speak of injustice. He didn't beg. He didn't defend himself. That chapter was long written, 5 years of shouting into deaf ears. He simply whispered, "I just hope. Ranger knows I'm innocent." The doctor nodded, a routine movement, positioning the needle at the IV port, ready to inject the mixture the law called justice. Behind the bulletproof glass, witnesses leaned forward. Some took notes, others just stared, heavy-eyed. Family of the victim, reporters, prosecutors looking for peace in a system that rarely gave it. But in Elias's mind, time had abandoned its ticking. It became breaths, memories. It became Ranger. He remembered the first time they met, when Ranger had been scheduled for euthanasia at the rescue shelter. No one wanted a large dog with a scarred hind leg, one who never barked and sat silently in the corner. But Elias saw his eyes. And in those eyes, he saw himself, a creature once discarded, aching for love, still waiting for someone who might never come. From that day, they were inseparable. Ranger wasn't just a dog. He was home. He was the final stitch holding Elias's soul together after loneliness had shredded it to pieces. He once told Ava, the last person to leave him before the trial, "If there's anything pure in this world, it's in Ranger's eyes." They used to walk by the river, where Ranger chased dry leaves. On cold nights, when Elias couldn't sleep, Ranger would silently climb into bed, breaking his training, but offering the only warmth Elias had left. Now, in this colorless room, there were no dry leaves, no wind, no sky, no avenue. Only Ranger, in memory. Then, a ringing sound. Not death. A phone. The sharp chime of the intercom sliced through the stillness. The doctor froze. The needle hovered less than an inch from Elias's skin. "Director?" The warden answered the phone. A few seconds passed. His face shifted, tightened. "Stop!" He turned toward the room. "Stop everything. Orders from the governor. Execution is postponed." Silence. Even death seemed to hesitate. Elias opened his eyes. He didn't blink, didn't react. He couldn't afford to believe, couldn't afford to hope. Only one thought drifted in his mind. Was it Ranger? Did he do something? The doctor slowly stepped back. The warden gestured to remove the restraints. The metallic clicks were the sweetest sound Elias had heard in 5 years. Blood returned to his limbs, making him dizzy. Life, strange, unfamiliar, was clawing its way back into his bones. Someone helped him sit up. The room remained blurry. He asked, barely audible, "What's happening?" The warden replied simply, "We can't say much, but new evidence has surfaced. The governor wants a full review." As Elias was led out of the execution chamber, he passed the thick glass, and behind it, just out of focus, stood a figure, a small shadow beside them, possibly a dog, waiting just beyond the hallway. Elias's heart clenched. Could it be? Had Ranger come back? The solitary confinement cell was so quiet, Elias Kane could hear the blood rushing in his ears. After being brought back from the execution chamber, no one cuffed him. No one questioned him. They just left him alone, with the dim light flickering from a low ceiling bulb, a cold iron bed, and the shadows crawling slowly back into his mind. He sat there, still, not speaking, not moving, not asking, just breathing. Barely. For 5 years, he thought he had come to terms with dying. Each night in that cell had been a rehearsal. Every breath another step toward the final door. But when death finally came close enough to touch him, another door opened. And that didn't make him feel relief. It made every buried wound claw its way back to the surface. He leaned his head against the wall, eyes fixed on the ceiling. His voice was just a whisper. Why did it take this long? For someone to believe. 5 years, he'd lived like a ghost inside a justice system he once trusted. A former law student, Elias had written essays on fairness, the right to defense, the moral obligation of the courts. He had believed that truth and evidence were enough. But the world didn't run on truth. It ran on power, on who spoke louder, on who could afford the better attorney. And Elias? He had nothing. Except for a dog who couldn't testify, couldn't object, couldn't stand in a courtroom and say, "My human didn't do this." Elias let out a dry laugh, the sound clinking against the stone floor like broken metal. "Ranger, you were my only witness, and you couldn't say a word, could you?" His mind drifted back to the trial. The prosecutor stood tall, voice clear, eyes like they'd already written the verdict. "Clear motive, clear opportunity, premeditated act." The jury looked at Elias like he was another statistic, an insider who snapped. Anger, money, revenge, pick your narrative. No one asked why a man with years of spotless service and steady promotion would suddenly break. No one wanted to know if there was something behind it, a fraud, a setup, a betrayal. He had screamed in court, "I was framed," and all he got back was silence. He bowed his head, eyes closing, and saw Vincent Rourke, the man who once called him a future leader. And then Julian, the brother, the shadow, the smile that never quite reached the eyes. Elias remembered Julian's face when he was arrested. Not hatred, not fear, just calculation. And maybe a flicker of pity. Like a pawn, sacrificed at the perfect moment, Elias muttered. For 5 years, he received only 2 things from the outside world. Letters from Ava that were never answered. And one single photo. Ranger, curled in Ava's lap, looking at the camera like he was still waiting for Elias to come home. No family, no friends, only Ranger stayed. The only creature who didn't abandon him, even when the whole world condemned him. He remembered the day Ava visited. She handed him that photo. No tears, no comforting words. Just this. "I don't know if you're guilty or not, but Ranger still waits." And that sentence kept Elias alive for 5 more years. He stood, walking slowly around the cell. His hand brushed a scratch on the wall, the place he'd carved his tally marks. 1,825 days, each one a war, not to go mad, not to lose faith, not to give up. Whenever he neared the edge, he'd think of Ranger's eyes. When he was happy, when he was hungry, when he was tired, when he curled up by Elias's feet at the end of a long day. A dog that couldn't betray, a soul that didn't know how to lie. A quiet reminder that Elias had once lived a life worth something. Ranger, Elias sighed. Do you remember? Those early days, I didn't even have a name for you. I wasn't planning to keep you. You just looked too lonely. Like me. And in the end, you were the only one who kept me alive. He chuckled. But this time, it was a tired, hoarse laugh, like thorns in his throat. He sat down on the edge of the bed, fists clenched. If things have truly changed, if I get to live again. A pause. I won't waste it on revenge. I'll use it to give truth a voice, so others like me, and like you, won't be forgotten. Lights off. Night fell. But in the darkness of that cold cell, Elias's eyes lit up, not with desperation, but with something quietly rising. Belief. That maybe, just once more, justice would say the right name. And the first soul he wanted to share that hope with was still Ranger. Before inmate 412-57, before the gurney, he was once called the financial healer. Long before the shackles, before the cold metal table and the needle poised to end his life, Elias Kane had another name. They called him the financial healer. He wasn't the kind of genius who gave TED Talks or walked out of luxury cars in tailored suits. Elias was quieter. He showed up with rolled-up sleeves, an old laptop, and eyes that could read numbers that lied. His rise to prominence began with a small paper. At just 23, Elias submitted an independent financial analysis to the New York State Treasury, not to seek fame, but simply to prove his thesis had real-world value. Most ignored it, except for one senior advisor. That advisor shared it with a private roundtable. 3 weeks later, Elias was invited to speak before the City Finance Council. He sat in a room of Armani suits, reading financial code line by line, flipping through risk reports like comic books. His voice was soft, unassuming, but each word made pens scratch across notepads. A month later, 3 venture capital firms sent offers. But only one name caught his attention. Rourke Holdings. Not for the salary, not for the title, but for one handwritten sentence at the bottom of the offer letter. We don't just need someone who can solve the equation. We need someone who can see what the real equation is. V.R. Vincent Rourke. The name was legend. A man who turned a near-bankrupt firm into an empire in just 5 years. But few knew Vincent started not on Wall Street, but from his mother's street cart in Brooklyn. Elias knew that, and he respected that. Their first meeting wasn't in a boardroom. It was in a tiny cafe on Manhattan's West Side. Vincent sat in a corner, long coat, notebook in hand. "Sit," he said. "No greetings, no pleasantries?" Elias sat silently. Vincent flipped to a page, an edited balance sheet scribbled over in pen. "This report passed 6 rounds of audit. What do you see?" Elias needed less than 10 seconds. Line 23, recurring wire transfers without recipient detail. Also, the accounts payable column is using reverse progressive logic. They're masking depreciation or capital loss. Vincent looked up and smiled. The first time Elias saw him smile, as if he'd just found a rare card in a deck of financial lies. "You look at the white space," Vincent said. "Most people only see the totals." 2 weeks later, Elias became the youngest director in Rourke Holdings history, leading the internal analysis and restructuring division. Under his watch, bad debts were cleared, cash flows stabilized. But Elias didn't just fix numbers, he fixed the company's thinking. At a board meeting, Vincent once said, "To save a company from collapse, bring it closer to the human value." Elias does that. It was the first, and only, time Elias felt like he truly belonged somewhere. But Rourke Holdings had more than just Vincent. There was Julian Rourke, Vincent's half-brother. If Vincent was light, sharp, demanding, but honest, then Julian was silk-wrapped shadow, always polite, always smiling. But every word he spoke carried a second meaning. Julian didn't manage the books directly. His role was to maintain relationships with special investors, and those investors weren't all clean. At first, Elias thought he just didn't like Julian's methods, but the more he analyzed, the more he sensed rot beneath the numbers. Unusual consulting fees, contracts signed and canceled within days, money redistributed to shell companies with no real presence. Elias once asked Vincent, "Do you ever audit Julian's side of operations?" Vincent didn't answer immediately. He sipped his coffee, then said quietly, "Family is the hardest part of business." It didn't satisfy Elias, but he let it go. Until one night, Elias received an email. No subject, no message body, just a folder and one line. "If you still believe in justice, keep this." Inside were transaction logs, audio recordings, and a flowchart of financial transfers. Every arrow pointed to Julian. Elias told no one. He didn't rush to the police. He thought, make sure, find more proof. But that moment was when the trap closed. 3 weeks later, Vincent died in a mysterious home accident. Elias, the last person on record to have met him, was arrested. The headline screamed, "Genius turned killer, the dark fall of Elias Kane." Now, back in his cold cell, Elias remembered it all. He had once been called a savior, but brilliance, when pointed at darkness, makes you the first to be eliminated. Because in a world run by lies, truth is the most expensive threat. Some wounds don't show on skin. They live in memory, quiet as needles, only stinging when you think you've finally forgotten. Elias Kane wasn't born in darkness, but darkness swallowed him before he ever had a choice. His parents died in a car crash when he was 5. No relatives, no home. Elias was passed from orphanage to foster center like a return label no one wanted. Too thin, too quiet, too unsettling in the way he stared at walls without blinking. He didn't cry, didn't speak, didn't resist when the older kids beat him, stole his food, or lashed out just to feel power. Only his eyes stayed the same. Wide open, silent, learning how to survive by watching. At 9, he was sent to live with a cattle ranching couple in central Texas. They didn't want a son. They wanted a boy who could carry buckets, haul hay, and stay quiet. Mr. Foster, the man he was told to call Dad, didn't beat him often. But when he did, it was with a belt, a pipe, or drunken fists that smelled like gasoline and grief. Elias learned to hold his breath when he heard those boots pass by his bedroom at night. "Mrs. Foster?" She said nothing. Always nothing. As if Elias was just leftover air in the house. By 13, Elias was used to being invisible. But the real nightmare didn't come from others. It came from inside. One winter night, after being beaten bloody for breaking an empty liquor bottle, Elias walked out behind the livestock barn. In his hand, a rope. No one noticed. No one came looking. The old oak behind the house had once offered summer shade. Now, it would hold the end of his story. He tied the knot, climbed the crate, placed the loop around his neck. Then, a bark. A dog, old, skinny, limping, ran out from the dark, howling, clawing at him like it understood. Its eyes were wet, afraid, pleading. It bit into Elias's sleeve, yanking with every ounce of strength. The crate toppled. The rope slipped. Elias hit the ground, gasping for breath. He wrapped his arms around the dog and cried, for the first time in years. The dog's name was Bruno, the last survivor of an old slaughterhouse the Fosters once ran. Bruno lived only a few months more. But in that time, he gave Elias back something the world had taken: the ability to feel loved. At 16, Elias ran away from the ranch, left behind the violence and the silence. He lived in shelters, took every job he could, cleaning, lifting, waiting tables, just to survive and keep going to school. One freezing evening, walking past the city animal shelter, Elias saw something that stopped him cold. A pair of eyes. A German shepherd locked in the far cage. It didn't bark, didn't whine, didn't approach people. Its back was scarred. Patches of fur were missing. Its intake tag read, "Ranger, unfit, to be euthanized." Elias stood there for 15 minutes. He saw himself, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, in that dog, not asking, not pleading, just watching, just waiting. He filled out the adoption form, signed, emptied his last savings to cover vaccines and licensing. The shelter worker asked, "You sure?" "This one's hard to train." Elias replied, "I don't need him to obey. I just need him not to leave." For the first 3 months, Ranger didn't sleep. He paced, panted, growled at shadows. Elias didn't force it. He laid a blanket nearby, sat on the floor, read books out loud, not for the story, but so Ranger could hear the rhythm of a man who wouldn't hit him. Then one morning, Elias woke from a fever, to find Ranger curled up at his feet. For the first time, the dog rested its head on Elias's hand. From that day on, they were a team. Elias began studying K9 training. No formal classes, no fancy programs, just old manuals, grainy online videos, and the belief that if he could learn to live again, so could Ranger. He taught him scent recognition. 3 taps. Stop. 1 tap. Go. They practiced object tracking, coded keywords, and most importantly, the art of silence. Through his college years, Ranger was Elias's only friend. He followed him to class, waited outside the library, slept beside the couch when Elias wrote late into the night. When nightmares returned, of belts and shouting and fists, Ranger would rest his chin on Elias's chest, breathing slow, reminding him, "It's over. You're safe." Once, Elias was punched while stopping a mugging. Ranger didn't bite, but he stood in front of Elias, growling low until the crowd backed away. They say dogs are loyal. But to Elias, Ranger was more than that. He was family, the only one he'd ever truly had. No blood ties, no shared name. But the only soul that ever made Elias believe he was worth saving. Now, in the cold silence of a prison cell, Elias closed his eyes and whispered, "If one day I'm gone, Ranger, I hope you remember I once lived for you." They say love comes when you least expect it and leaves when you're not ready. Elias Kane met Ava Kingsley on a rainy March afternoon, the day Ranger nearly lost his leg saving a child from being hit by a car. Elias had rushed him to the nearest animal clinic, heart pounding, mind in chaos, terrified of losing the only friend he had in the world. And Ava, white coat, hair tied up, eyes soft as early autumn, stepped out into the downpour holding an umbrella. She didn't shield herself. She covered Ranger. "Can I take care of his injury?" she asked. Before she even finished, Elias nodded. He didn't know her name, but her hands were gentle, and when her eyes met Ranger's, It was like they spoke a silent language, a language Elias had never seen in anyone before. She didn't ask pointless questions, no small talk, no social noise. She worked quietly, carefully, as if the wounded dog were family. After stitching, cleaning, bandaging, and an antibiotic shot, she simply said, "He's brave and well-behaved, but you're braver, loving something so deeply that the fear of losing it shakes you." From that day on, Elias returned weekly to check Ranger's healing. Then the checkups turned into conversations. Ava never asked where Elias came from, never asked why he lived alone, or if he had any family. She only asked about Ranger and listened as Elias talked about his strange habits, how he liked classical music, or how they ran together in the rain. Once, when the clinic was quiet, Ava sat cross-legged on the floor, back against the medicine shelf, reading a book of fairy tales to Ranger. Elias chuckled. "You're really reading to a dog?" She smiled without looking up. "Dogs don't need words. They feel rhythm and kindness. That's enough." Elias stood in the doorway. The sunset cast a golden glow through the window. Ranger lay between them, ears twitching to her voice. And in that stillness, Elias felt something he had never truly known. A home. They never said, "I love you." But every glance, every brief brush of fingers exchanging a coffee cup, every time Ava stroked Ranger's fur with trembling fingers weakened by her heart condition, it filled a cavern Elias had carried in his soul for years. Ava didn't try to fix him. She simply stayed. Like a small light in the dark, not loud but constant. Elias once thought, if his life was a desert, Ava was the only tree he ever sat beneath. Then, the storm hit. When Elias was arrested for the murder of Vincent Rourke, he didn't call a lawyer, didn't call the press. He dialed one number, Ava's. She came the next morning. No tears, no accusations, just handed him a notebook. Inside, a childish sketch of Ranger as a puppy, something she had found in Elias's room when she quietly returned to collect Ranger's things. She looked at Elias for a long time, then said, "I don't know what to believe. The news, people, they say so much." Elias met her eyes, holding himself upright. "Do you believe I didn't do it?" There was a silence long enough to hear a pin drop. Finally, she replied, "I'm not sure I have the strength to believe anything anymore, Elias." Then she turned and walked away. Slowly, like someone who had just dropped something heavy and knew they could never bend down to pick it up. She never came again. No visits, no calls, no letters. Only Ranger, whom she agreed to care for temporarily, remained, and the few photos a prison staff member passed along were the only way Elias knew the dog was still safe. He didn't blame her. In a world that turned against him, Ava was the only one who didn't stab him in the back. She just couldn't bear to stand by his side. And sometimes that, too, was a kind of gentleness. He remembered the last time he saw her, through the thick glass of the prison visitation room, where touch was forbidden. She wore a deep brown coat. Her hair hung loose. Her face was thinner. She placed her hand on the glass, said nothing. Elias placed his hand over hers, glass between them, as if it meant touch. And in that moment, they said everything, without a single word. Back in solitary, Elias touched his chest, where the heart still beat steadily. But with each beat, a hollow space echoed inside. Not because he had lost Ava, but because he never truly had her. "If there's one reason I still want to live," he whispered, "it's because I never got to tell her, I love you." No one taught Elias Kane how to detect a financial conspiracy. He just listened, to numbers. There was always something about numbers that spoke to him. A misplaced comma, a duplicated line item, like whispers no one else could hear. And one late October evening, when the office had gone dark, when only the hum of the air conditioner and the glow of a corner desk lamp remained, Elias saw it. A fund flow report from the Singapore branch. On the surface, flawless. Every expense justified. Every contract bearing 3 signatures. Invoice codes properly formatted. But something was off. Line 47. A $1.5 million entry listed as Executive HR Consulting Fee, wired to a company called Nexum Consulting. He looked it up. No U.S. tax ID. The address? A rented mailbox in the British Virgin Islands. Digging deeper, he found 4 similar transfers over 6 months, all from different branches, all approved by the same person, Julian Rourke. Elias said nothing. Didn't file a report. He knew too well, the first to uncover financial rot doesn't always get a medal. Sometimes they just disappear. For the next 2 weeks, Elias operated in silence. He backed up files, took screenshots, encrypted folders with unique passwords. He saved everything to a flash drive labeled Puppy, Vaccines 2024, as if it contained Ranger's medical records. At night, he mapped it all out. Money trails, shell companies, missing staff logs, repeated expenses that no one dared audit. And in every circle he drew, Julian stood at the center. But one question clawed at Elias. What about Vincent? Vincent Rourke was meticulous. Nothing passed him unnoticed. Did he really not know? Or did he know and choose silence? Elias didn't want to believe it. Vincent had been the first to see him. Not just his resume, but the way he read between the numbers. And if Vincent was part of the cover-up, then what world had Elias been living in? Then came Friday night. After a short meeting on restructuring the European division, Vincent asked Elias to stay behind. No suspicion, no distance, just a casual invitation to coffee in his private office, like old times. "Is there something you want to tell me?" Vincent asked. Same low, steady voice. Elias hesitated. He wanted to speak, wanted to ask. But in that moment, a deeper fear took hold. If Vincent was dirty too, there'd be no one left to trust. So Elias smiled faintly, shook his head. Vincent looked at him for a long time, then nodded slowly. "Then take a break, Elias. You've been working too hard." 2 days later, Vincent Rourke was found dead in his luxury penthouse. Initial report: anaphylactic shock. But the news didn't come from the police. It came through an anonymous email. Subject line: "The next pawn." Attached, a grainy camera still from the building's basement. The last person seen entering Vincent's apartment was Elias Kane. He froze. Yes, he had gone there. Vincent had called him over that night for a private talk. But when Elias arrived, the guard said Vincent had just stepped out. So he left. He didn't think anything of it. But someone had spliced the footage, edited it, framed him as the last one to leave the scene of death. Hours later, police stormed Elias's home. No warning, no chance to explain. They cuffed him on the floor, in front of Ranger. The dog growled, lunged, but Elias shouted, "No, Ranger!" And in his companion's confused, pleading eyes, Elias was dragged away in chains. The headlines erupted. Genius turns killer. Power struggle ends in murder. From whistleblower to bloodshed, Elias Kane's fall from grace. He wasn't allowed to speak. The court-appointed lawyer told him, "Stay quiet. Anything you say will make you look guiltier." And just like that, the trap snapped shut. Ranger was taken away, treated like forgotten property. Ava disappeared. Colleagues stayed silent. And Julian Rourke, the man no one questioned, took the stage as the new face of recovery, promising to rebuild the company his brother left behind. Elias, buried beneath accusations, had nothing left. The encrypted files? Gone. Deleted before police arrived. Someone had wiped everything. In prison, Elias had all the time in the world to reconstruct the conspiracy, piece by piece. He knew he'd been framed. But proving it? Impossible. And what hurt most wasn't the loss of career, or freedom, or name. It was Ranger's eyes, watching him being taken. Not angry, not scared, just full of questions. Why? From a financial prodigy to a branded murderer. And the conspiracy, whatever its name, had already destroyed everything Elias Kane once believed in. The courtroom is where justice lives, they say. But Elias Kane knew better. Not every courtroom seeks the truth. Some are built not to illuminate, but to extinguish. His trial lasted 3 weeks, but it took just 3 days for the media to decide. Guilty. They called him the genius killer, the two-faced prodigy, the fox in human skin. A financial magazine that once featured him on its cover now ran a new headline: From Glory to the Gallows, the Fall of Elias Kane. No one asked, why would a man with a career, a future, and a name choose murder over disagreement? No one cared that Elias had submitted internal warnings about suspicious financial activity. No journalist bothered to ask, why did Vincent Rourke die without a struggle? Why were there no clear surveillance records in a building wired tighter than a vault? Everything had already been explained. And truth, if it ever existed, had lost to the story people preferred. The prosecutor, silver hair, pressed suit, a voice made for closing arguments, told the tale like a best-selling thriller. A brilliant but arrogant analyst, a conservative boss, an ideological clash, a fatal encounter, death disguised as anaphylactic shock, a motive as old as ambition, control. The jury nodded. The press nodded. The public nodded. Elias sat in silence. His eyes didn't drop, but he knew. He was no longer a man to them. He was a symbol, a reminder that morality in finance is dangerous. His defense attorney tried his best, but he had no power, no leverage, and, most fatally, no evidence. The real evidence Elias once had. On a flash drive, encrypted, hidden at home. But when the police raided the apartment, it was gone. No files, no folders, like they never existed. Elias had once imagined shouting in court, naming every name, tearing down the curtain. But he stayed quiet. Not because he surrendered, but because he understood. Nothing terrifies liars more than the man who knows the truth and hasn't spoken it yet. When the verdict came, death by lethal injection, Elias shed no tears. One question echoed in his mind. What about Ranger? He knew he'd be moved to death row, and law didn't allow inmates to keep pets. On his last day at the county facility, he overheard guards chatting. The dog's been sent to a shelter. Some vet took him in. Elias screamed through the bars. Who? Who took him? No one answered. But deep inside, he hoped Ava, the only person who might still believe him, even if she never said it. Days later, Elias received a single photo. No sender, no note. Just Ranger, curled at the feet of a woman with long hair, a familiar profile, a hand softly resting on his back. Avenue. In that moment, Elias cried. Not for himself, but for Ranger, because Ranger was still loved. After that, Elias was cut off. No calls, no letters, no visits, except on designated, state-sanctioned holidays. He lived in a steel box. Lights never turned off. Food slid through a metal slot. No clocks, no seasons, just days, and the countdown. Each morning, he remembered. The night Vincent called him, then vanished. The camera footage that malfunctioned. The encrypted files that disappeared the day after he opened the final report. And most of all, Julian Rourke, standing on live television 1 week after the murder, tears in his eyes, saying, "Vincent was my brother, a financial hero. I promised to carry his legacy forward." Elias had wanted to throw a chair at the screen. But then he remembered Vincent's final words. "Family is the hardest part of business, Elias, especially when they're also your rivals." Maybe, Vincent knew, maybe he was the only one who never saw Elias as a traitor. Vincent didn't die in tragedy. He was removed, a sacrificial piece in a far bigger game. And Elias? A replacement pawn, disposable. Some nights, Elias woke from nightmares, sweat-soaked, heart racing, whispering, "Ranger! Ranger!" He thought he was losing his mind. But then he smiled. If madness meant remembering those eyes, that cold nose, that unwavering loyalty, then madness wasn't such a curse. On the prison wall, near the air vent that let in a faint breath of evening wind, Elias carved a single line with a plastic spoon. "I know I was framed, but I haven't spoken my last word." And he waited. For the day, the countdown reached 1. For the moment, Ranger came back. The first rain of the season fell like a premonition. Wind howled down the narrow streets, slapping tree branches against the windows of the small veterinary clinic on the corner of Maple and 6th. Ava sat frozen in her chair, a damp envelope trembling in her hand. The paper had wrinkled from the rain, and the signature at the bottom, blue ink, shaky, looked like it had been written by a hand running out of time. The final request of death row inmate Elias Kane. "I don't ask for forgiveness. Only one thing, to see Ranger, my friend, one last time before I leave this world." Ava lowered the letter. Her eyes drifted to the corner of the room, where Ranger, his coat grayer now, his eyes older than they should be, lay curled in silence. She knelt beside him, running her fingers through fur that was thinning in patches from age and silent traumas. "He wants to see you," she whispered. "Maybe for the last time." Ranger looked at her. Didn't bark. Didn't whine. He simply leaned forward and nuzzled her hand. A quiet yes. The next morning, Ava brought Ranger to the vet for a full exam. Not because she feared he was ill, but because she wanted to be sure. That if Elias saw him again, even just once, he'd see the Ranger he remembered. Strong, clean, unbroken. She monitored every result. Heart rhythm, steady. Reflexes, sharp. Vision, clear. The only issue, a slight limp from an old injury on his left leg. The vet recommended more rest. Ava nodded. On the way home, she stopped at Seneca Lake, the last place the three of them had been together. Her, Elias, and Ranger, before the world fractured. Ranger stepped slowly from the car. He sniffed the grass, each blade a memory. Ava sat on the same bench, watched the murky water and thought of the years that had passed, years where she hadn't had the courage to believe Elias, but never once stopped loving him. That night, the rain came down hard. Thunder rolled like war drums in her chest. Ava locked every door, set Ranger's bedding in the bedroom, then sat at her desk, opened her laptop, and began to file the official petition, requesting a visit with a prisoner, attaching Ranger's medical clearance, fulfilling every protocol to bring a dog into a maximum security facility. 11:45 p.m. She dozed off for just a few minutes, head slumped to the side, breathing shallow from the heart condition that had worsened in recent months. Then, a noise. Click! She jolted awake. The room was still lit, the doors locked, but the dog bed, empty. Ava's heart seized. Ranger? No answer, only the living room window, wide open. The curtains whipped like flags. Rain had drenched a long streak across the wooden floor. She sprinted outside, barefoot, the rain soaking through her nightgown. Ranger! Lightning drowned her voice. The street was empty. No paw prints, no movement, no familiar gaze looking back. Panicked, she searched every room, checked every corner. Finally, she turned on the security camera system, something she almost never did. Error. Footage cut out at exactly 11:29 p.m. Someone had broken in. Not to steal money. Not to ransack the place. Just to take Ranger. Ava collapsed into the nearest chair, her body trembling. Not from the cold, but from fear. Fear that someone out there wanted to stop Elias from seeing his only remaining friend. Fear that, somehow, Ranger wasn't just a dog anymore. That maybe, just maybe, Elias had hidden something inside him. Ava called the prison warden, begged for an exception, explained what had happened. The reply came cold and flat. If there's no Ranger, there's no visit. She hung up, her fingers shaking, her breath short. There was only one name left to call: Luther Briggs. The ex-detective who had once investigated Elias's case before being suspended for disrupting procedure. He answered after 3 rings. His voice, as always, was low and clipped. Ava? Ranger's gone. Her voice cracked. There was silence on the line. Then, a heavy sigh. They may be trying to erase the last link to Elias. Ava tightened her grip on the phone, rain mixed with tears. They won't erase everything. Not while I'm still breathing. That night, Ava didn't sleep. She sat on the cold living room floor, opening every photo of Ranger, every vaccination receipt, every checkup note, looking for anything, any pattern, any name, any trace of someone watching them. Outside, the rain continued to fall, steady, relentless. And Ava knew time was running out. If Elias was to die without seeing Ranger again, it wouldn't be just separation. It would be the theft of a soul. By the time morning broke, Ava was already tearing the room apart. Her eyes were bruised from a sleepless night. Her hands trembled with fatigue. But still they moved, desperately, relentlessly, through every drawer, every file. She couldn't wait for a miracle. Ranger wasn't coming back on his own. She needed a lead, anything to start the trail. And then, she found it. A photograph, buried beneath medical records and vaccination slips. She had taken it earlier that year, after Elias first asked her to care for Ranger. In the image, Ranger lay peacefully beside a patch of purple flowers in the front yard. Morning light glinted off his silver-gray coat. A portrait of serenity. But Ava looked closer. Under the fur near his jawline, just beneath the collar, a faint scratch, almost invisible to most. But she was a vet. She knew. That spot wasn't easy to injure. It wasn't from scratching, and it didn't look like a bug bite. Her heart skipped. A suspicion flickered. She pulled up the image at maximum resolution, grabbed her magnifying lens. There, Beneath a fold of fur, just at the collar's edge, a tiny metallic dot, no larger than a pinhead. "It can't be," she whispered. She flipped through Ranger's microchip records. Nothing. No registered chip implant, nothing in the standard location behind the neck. Only one explanation remained. Elias had implanted a chip himself. Secretly. She didn't need more proof. There was only one person who could help now. Luther Briggs. The former financial crimes investigator, the one assigned to Elias's case before he was pulled off for being too involved, too inconvenient. Ava called him immediately. 37 minutes later, Luther stepped into her clinic. Mid-60s, lean but unyielding, worn leather jacket, and eyes that had never stopped noticing what others missed. Ava handed him the photo. Luther studied it for 3 seconds, pressed his lips tight. "That's not a veterinary microchip," he said. "That's high-density RFID, used for secure document tracking in finance ops." Ava nodded. Elias worked in Rourke Holdings' internal security. He must have hidden something inside it. Luther didn't look surprised. "And they never found it, so now they've taken the dog." He pulled out his phone, opened an app. It was a custom RFID frequency scanner, a tool he'd built back when he still had badge access. "If the chip's still broadcasting and within 50 kilometers, we can find it." Ava's eyes lit up. "We can find Ranger?" Luther looked her dead in the eye. "Not just Ranger, the truth." They climbed into the car. Ava took the wheel. Luther plugged in the scanner. A map flickered on the screen. A red dot blinked. Then, disappeared. No signal. Ava tightened her grip on the steering wheel. "You think they found it and removed the chip?" Luther shook his head. "Not easily. If Elias hid it the way I think, layered synthetic casing tucked inside the lining of a leather collar, then they'd have to strip the entire collar down to find it." He paused, then pointed to a section on the map. "Here, East Side Industrial District, Old Rourke Holdings facility. I flagged it once, but internal compliance killed the lead, no warrant." Ava changed lanes. The tires hissed over rain-soaked asphalt. Outside the windshield, the city flashed past. Factories half abandoned, offices turned tombs, monuments to a financial empire that once rose and crumbled on Elias Kane's name. Luther reached into his jacket, pulled out a worn sidearm, checked the chamber. "Just in case," he muttered. Ava didn't question him. She placed a hand over her chest, where her heart beat loud and tired beneath the fabric. She didn't know what waited for them. But one thing was clear. If they lost Ranger, Elias would die before the truth ever had a chance to live, and she wasn't going to let that happen. Near midnight, rain tore the sky apart as Luther's old pickup rattled down the muddy road. They were headed east, to the city's abandoned industrial zone, where silence weighed like lead and rusted warehouses loomed like ghosts guarding buried secrets. Ava sat in the passenger seat, fingers clenched around her phone, eyes locked on the RFID scanner. The signal flickered, appearing, vanishing, reappearing again, like the labored breath of someone barely holding on. Ahead, a stretch of darkness swallowed every trace of light. Twisted roofs, broken glass, steel skeletons guarding truths no one wanted found. Luther killed the headlights. He gestured for silence, slipping a pistol into his waistband. Ava adjusted the flashlight in her sleeve, gripping the fold-down blade inside. "Stay 3 steps behind me," he said. She nodded once. They moved, 2 shadows disappearing into the night. Rain pelted the corrugated metal rooftops. Their footsteps crunched softly on the muddy ground. Then, the scanner lit up. Warehouse 7, the signal glowed bright. Luther pointed. There. The steel door hung slightly ajar. No lock, no lights. But inside, just for a moment, a flashlight beam swept across the darkness. Luther raised his gun. Ava tightened her grip on the light. They pressed against the right-hand wall, avoiding the open. 3, 2, 1. Luther kicked the door in. They rushed inside, lights flaring across cold concrete and steel racks. No people, no sound. But Dash. Ranger was there, lying on the floor, tied with industrial-grade cable, 4 legs bound, a strip of duct tape across his snout. His eyes met Ava's. No bark, no whimper. Just exhausted joy. "Ranger," Ava whispered, rushing forward. Luther swept the room, gun raised. He moved between crates and pallets, clearing corners. There were signs. Someone had left recently. An unopened water bottle. A pack of dry food. They'd planned to keep Ranger here. Ava cut the cables, removed the tape. Ranger whimpered once, then immediately began licking her hand, ears drooping with relief. She held him tight, her voice cracking. "I'm here. I'm here. I'm so sorry." Luther knelt beside them, pressing his fingers under Ranger's thick fur, feeling for the mark. "There's something hard here," he muttered. He pulled out a pocket knife, carefully slicing into the collar seam. Beneath the outer leather layer, expertly hand-stitched, was a thin copper chip, no bigger than a fingertip, lightly dusted, engraved with a faded barcode and serial string. He passed it to Ava. She wiped it clean under the flashlight's glow. The letters shimmered. GSX-7. Authorized access. Encrypted key, EKANE. She froze. "This is—" she stammered. Luther nodded. "A decryption key." No doubt. Elias hadn't just hidden a chip. He'd hidden a master key, possibly to a private vault or a covert account system never linked to his name. Luther opened his laptop, connected the chip to a custom USB reader, a relic from his old days in internal investigations. The screen blinked. Private vault detected. Enter authorized key. Ava looked down at Ranger. Her eyes shimmered with tears. "He didn't trust anyone. But he trusted you, Ranger." Luther input the code. The system whirred for 20 seconds. Then, the vault opened. Inside were 5 folders of raw security footage from the basement parking lot, the night Vincent died. Audio recordings between Julian Rourke and an overseas financier. Transaction logs showing illegal offshore transfers. An internal restructure plan naming Vincent as a non-compliant variable to be eliminated. And one final file. "If I die, tell the world." Ava covered her mouth, choking back a sob. Luther closed the laptop, voice calm but urgent. "We need to go, now." They lifted Ranger into the back seat. The truck peeled out into the night. Behind them, in the shadows of Warehouse 7, a pair of eyes watched, then disappeared. The rain hadn't stopped, but inside the truck, a strange calm had settled. No one spoke. They didn't need to. They both knew. What they carried in that laptop might not just save a life. It could take down an empire built on lies. The fluorescent lights in the execution chamber were bright. Too bright. Cold. Sterile. The kind of light that made even death hold its breath. Elias Kane lay still on the steel gurney. Thick leather straps bound his wrists and ankles. An IV line had already been inserted into the vein in his left arm. Saline flowed steadily, the quiet prelude before the lethal injection. Above him, a grid of sterile white tiles, gray walls, pale greenish light. The wall clock ticked to 9:58 a.m. 2 minutes. 2 minutes for a man's entire life. But Elias didn't feel fear. He had lived through this scene 1,825 times, in his head. Every night in his cell, every step, from the cold light to the metallic click of the syringe, was no longer unfamiliar. Except for one thing. In his mind, Ranger was always there, sitting quietly at his side. But today, the room was too empty. A doctor in a white coat approached, expressionless. He checked the IV, then took a tray from the nurse. 3 syringes, anesthetic, paralytic, and heart stopper. This was no longer medicine. It was ritual. Behind the two-way glass, the witnesses stood in silence. State officials, media, a prosecutor, 2 members of the Rourke family. Julian Rourke was not among them. Elias hadn't expected him to be. The man who staged this play didn't need to witness his audience's sorrow, only their belief. Outside, the storm still whispered, rain still fell. But on the freeway, a gray SUV tore through the downpour, its tires screaming as it sped toward the prison. Inside it, 2 people were gambling a man's life against a ticking clock. 12 minutes left, Ava shouted. Just drive! Luther gripped the laptop, the USB drive blinking green, like it too was running out of time. They'd barely made it out of the industrial zone, nearly 50 kilometers away. Too late by even 1 minute, and Elias would die. Call the governor, Ava said. We need proof first, Luther replied, his eyes locked on the screen. The video began to play. Vincent Rourke, alive, talking to Julian, clear voice, unharmed face, no corpse, no struggle, no overdose. In the next clip, Julian whispered, Vincent will disappear for a while, I'll take over. The media will swallow whatever we feed them. Ava's hands tightened on the wheel. Tears blurred her eyes. 9 minutes. Back in the chamber, a swab of alcohol wiped Elias's arm. The doctor prepared the first syringe. The room dimmed slightly. Or maybe it was Elias, slipping away. His mind began to drift, like his soul was rehearsing departure. In that quiet spiral, he saw Ranger, running free through a field of tall grass, ears flying back in the wind, eyes gleaming with the purest joy. Elias whispered inwardly, At least, we'll meet again over there. Outside the prison gates, Ava slammed on the brakes. She and Luther jumped out. He held the laptop. She clutched the USB. Move aside! She screamed as the guards blocked them. I'm Dr. Ava Kingsley. This is new evidence. If you don't let us through, an innocent man will die. One young officer hesitated. Luther stepped forward, flashing an old badge, worn, but still carrying weight. Call the warden. Tell him this is a state emergency, or be the man who let justice die. The guard faltered, then reached for the radio. Inside the chamber, the syringe was attached. 9:59:12. Begin the dose, the doctor said. Elias closed his eyes. Everything grew weightless. Brrring! A sharp ring sliced through the stillness. The red emergency phone on the wall blared, a line reserved only for executive orders. Everyone froze. The warden picked it up. Hello? Silence, then his face changed color. Stop everything. Disconnect the IV. Back out the needle. The nurse scrambled. The doctor dropped the syringe, its clang echoing like a gunshot. Elias opened his eyes. They were blank, not with death, but confusion. The warden stepped forward, leaned close, his voice steady but shaken. There's new evidence. The governor has issued a stay of execution. You still have time." Elias blinked. He could barely speak. But one breath escaped him. A whisper. A question not for the warden, but for the world. Was it Ranger? The red phone on the wall of the execution chamber was never meant to ring, not unless something greater than death itself was about to speak. So when it rang, no one moved. It was like a stage play torn apart by a sound never written in the script. Every eye turned toward it. 3 rings, short, sharp, slicing through the frozen air like a blade. The warden, keeper of order in this ritual of death, froze mid-reach. His hand was still hovering above the saline drip control. He didn't ask. He didn't speculate. He just walked straight to the phone and picked it up. "Hello?" His voice was dry, gravelly, but his eyes lit up, like a man roused from sleep into a sudden, blinding awareness. On the other end, a woman's voice rang clear and urgent. "Deputy Director of State Legal Affairs, Emergency Suspension Order 472-TX-20 has been signed and confirmed by the governor. Deliver a verified copy now. Halt all procedures immediately. Await further instructions pending review of newly submitted evidence." The warden tightened his grip on the receiver. "Understood." He hung up, turned to the room, and barked, "Stop everything! Halt execution immediately!" The nurse flinched, the second syringe still in her hand. The doctor stared, disbelief flickering in his eyes. "I repeat, cease now." 1 second. 2. The entire chamber held its breath, on the edge between jump and fall. Then the doctor withdrew the needle from the IV line. The nurse disengaged the vein tap. The lethal compound, mere seconds away from entering Elias's bloodstream, was stopped. The syringe clattered into the metal tray. A small sound, but it rang out like a bullet that missed its target. Elias opened his eyes. Everything was blurry, part dream, part surgical light. He didn't know if he was dead or alive until he saw the warden looking at him. Not coldly, not with detachment, but with something real, something almost human. "You're not dead," the warden said. "Someone stopped it." Elias didn't reply. He just lay there, like a man pulled from the ocean floor, lungs suddenly full, heart pounding, but his mind still trailing behind. Outside, Luther handed the emergency stay order to the prison representative. Ava stood beside him, lips dry, fingers clutching Ranger's collar, as if letting go might make everything disappear. The officer checked the seal. Timestamp, digital signature. "It's valid," he said. "We'll send it up to the chamber." Ava closed her eyes. She didn't cry, but her knees nearly gave out as she leaned against the car. Luther placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "You did it," he said gently. The chamber door opened. A small team of staff entered, carrying folders, recorders, tablets. A man in a coat bearing the state insignia stepped closer to Elias. "I'm a special investigator, Mr. Elias Kane. By order of the state and in light of new evidence, your execution has been suspended pending a full retrial." Elias remained still. "What evidence?" he rasped, his voice cracked from weeks of dryness and silence. The investigator looked him in the eye. "A video, a recording, and a dog named Ranger." As they unstrapped him, every movement made Elias's joints crack, like a body frozen for 5 years just now, learning how to thaw. His hands were numb, but his mind was racing. He didn't need to ask more. If Ava had come, if Ranger was alive, then surely they had found what he'd hidden most carefully. The final key to the truth. In the control room, Luther was already showing the footage. Vincent Rourke alive, walking, speaking. The audio of Julian confessing Vincent would disappear. Julian would take control, and the media would eat the lie. No more speculation, no more theory, just the truth. Raw, recorded, undeniable. Meanwhile, Ava sat with Ranger in the waiting room. The German shepherd rested his head on her lap, his eyes still bright, as if he understood that his life's mission had just been fulfilled. Ava stroked his fur gently and whispered, "You did good. So good, baby. I promise. Elias won't have to die now." 9:59:57. The second hand on the execution chamber clock paused. Not because the battery had died, but because, perhaps, time itself had stepped aside to let life return. In the control room of the prison's highest security wing, a small group of people gathered around an old silver laptop, its screen playing a video that could bring down an entire empire. Ranger lay at Ava's feet, ears perked up, as if listening to every frame. Luther sat opposite the screen, fingers resting on the keyboard, each keystroke deliberate, as if every tap pierced through 5 years of carefully layered lies. On the screen appeared a simple prompt. Enter code E.K. -confirm. He typed in the string of characters engraved on the metal chip hidden inside Ranger's collar. 1 second, then 2. The screen blinked. A series of folders opened. Ava tightened her grip, trying to steady her breath. Behind them, the lead investigator stood watching, face grave. A state IT officer began recording the entire decryption process, official evidence for the retrial file. "Here we go," Luther whispered. The first file was a video. The opening frame came from a security camera, angled high in the corner of Vincent Rourke's basement office. Timestamp, 3:12 a.m., 2 days before Vincent was allegedly found dead in his home. In the footage, Vincent was standing. Not a corpse, not a victim. He wore a white shirt, held a glass of wine, and was speaking to someone. The camera couldn't catch the face, but it picked up the audio. "You're sure you want to disappear completely?" a voice asked. Vincent's reply was clear. "Just temporarily. Julian wants full control of the board. I let him believe he has it, but he's not ready and not smart enough." "You think someone else will step up in your place?" Vincent chuckled. "There's one, Elias, but I'm not sure he's tough enough." The room went silent. Ava pressed a hand to her chest, eyes glued to the screen. The next clip was surveillance footage. This time, the full, uncut version from the night Elias was lured to Vincent's apartment. Elias was seen at the door, ringing the bell. No one answered. He peeked inside. The room was empty. No body. No signs of struggle. Only a tiny hidden camera in the corner, the same one that recorded the final image used to convict him. "They staged the crime scene," Ava murmured. Luther nodded grimly. "Exactly. No dead Vincent. Just Elias, alone, set up to take the fall in a play they'd already written." The second file was an audio recording. Julian Rourke's voice echoed clearly, like it had been captured just yesterday. "Vincent's gone. Thinks he'll come back in 6 months. Me? I don't think he ever will. And Elias, that clever boy, he'll take the hit. The media loves stories like this. A fallen prodigy. Justice served. The public'll swallow it whole. Won't even chew." Each word dropped like a bullet in the silence. No one in the room dared speak. "Anything else?" Luther asked, typing quickly. Ava moved the cursor to a folder labeled, "Do not open unless I'm dead." They glanced at each other. The investigator nodded. "Open it." A video file played. Elias, alone in his room just before his arrest, speaking directly to the camera in a calm, steady voice. "If you're watching this, Ranger, then I'm probably gone. I don't know who found you, but if it's Ava, if it's Luther, then I trust they'll know what to do." He looked straight into the lens. "I encrypted everything, all the evidence. It's in the RFID chip inside your collar. If you're still alive, then so is the truth. I don't want revenge. I just want no one else to die because of silence." He paused, then added, voice breaking slightly, "Thank you, Ranger, for never leaving." Ava buried her face in Ranger's thick fur, tears soaking her hands. The dog didn't whine. He simply nuzzled into her lap, quiet, content, as if he understood the mission was complete. The investigator stood tall, voice resolute. "I'll submit this immediately to the governor's office and the retrial court. The execution stay was just the first step. With this, we're looking at a full exoneration." Luther lifted his head, eyes sharp. "And not just that. This is enough to open a full investigation into Rourke Holdings' executive board and every judicial body involved in Elias's trial." In the corner of the room, Ranger lay down and exhaled. No barking, no boasting. Just a dog who carried the smallest key but saved a man from death and uncovered the truth that could set many more free. Inside a temporary war room set up by New York State's Special Task Force, rows of LED screens lit up the walls, displaying freshly decrypted files from a single silver USB stick. A USB that once rested quietly inside the collar of a dog. And now, it had become the key to unlocking a case once believed to be closed. On screen, a sprawling financial map unfolded. Arrows traced money flows across shell companies, offshore accounts, and front branches, from New York to the Cayman Islands, and from the Caymans to Zurich. At the center of it all, Julian Rourke. And linked on the other end, buried under layers of forged transactions. A digital signature, Vincent Rourke, verified and time-stamped after he was officially declared dead. "We're talking about an international money laundering operation," the lead investigator said. "But more than that, an orchestrated fake death meant to consolidate power and destroy a key witness. That witness, Elias Kane, was now under special medical supervision in a prison hospital. He hadn't yet been exonerated, but everyone in the room knew. His return was no longer a matter of if, but when." Ava sat beside Luther, watching the files open one by one. Not as a vet. Not as the woman who once loved Elias, but as someone who had finally heard the true voice of justice, unedited, unmuted, unafraid. A new audio file played, this time the raw original. Vincent's voice, measured, calculating, but tired. "Julian, you said I only had to disappear for 6 months. I let you restructure the board, and now, you want Elias to die in my place?" Julian's voice cut through, cold. "He knows too much, and I don't believe he's naive enough to stay out of power. A guy like Elias, smart, solitary, stubborn, you can't sideline that. You have to remove it. We could pull him out of this spiral." "No, Vincent," Julian snapped. "The name Elias Kane needs to be buried, not just for Rourke Holdings, but for me, for the system I just inherited, and he's a threat to that." Luther clenched his fist. "Listen carefully to this next part," he said. The audio continued. Julian again. "I've handled the media. A fallen genius, they eat that stuff up. I took care of Prosecutor Martin, too. He's getting a cut from the new fund. And the jury? Just paint the right picture. He looked too clever to be innocent, Vincent." Vincent hesitated. "And Ava?" "That girl knows he didn't kill me." Julian chuckled. "She's weak. She'll walk away, and then she'll go quiet, just like everyone else who's ever loved someone on death row." Ava turned away. Not from pain, but because back then, she had gone quiet. The next files were bank documents, hidden transfers disguised as branch restructuring, forged signatures on Vincent's fake will, all verified with forensic software. Every stroke, every timestamp told the truth. Vincent had never died. And worse, he'd lost control of the very game he'd helped create. When one PDF loaded, Internal Financial Analysis, Original Encryption by Elias Kane, the room went dead silent. It was the report Elias had prepared, the one he never got to submit before being arrested. Inside, a chart detailing dozens of shell companies, a precise map of how Rourke Holdings laundered its wealth through layered networks, then funneled it back as legitimate investments. Had this been released 5 years ago, it would have flipped the board. Now it had returned, intact. In the final file, a scanned note appeared, the handwriting unmistakably Elias's. If the truth is ever revealed, please don't be angry that I stayed silent for so long. I was only afraid that when no one believes in loyalty anymore, neither justice nor love would have any place left to hide. The lead investigator turned to Luther. How big do you think this goes? Luther's voice was razor sharp. This isn't just a wrongful conviction. This is a high-level conspiracy, big enough to collapse parts of our justice system if we don't handle it right. On the other side of the glass wall, Ranger still lay at Ava's feet. Quiet, calm, still. As if he knew he'd delivered the right package to the right people at the right hour and saved the right man. One final email, restored from the USB, displayed on screen. A message from Julian to a foreign partner. Once Elias is gone, I'll handle the rest. But he was wrong. Elias wasn't gone. He had merely gone quiet, waiting for the day Ranger would speak. An emergency meeting was called in the dead of night. At the New York State Department of Justice headquarters, a high-level task force had convened around a long oval table. Federal criminal investigators, internal affairs officers from the district attorney's office, and elite agents from the financial crimes unit. At the head of the table sat Luther Briggs, no longer the suspended detective for obstruction his file once labeled him as, but now the only man who had never stopped chasing the truth behind Elias Kane's case for 5 relentless years. Luther opened his laptop. Projected onto the wall, a financial flowchart, every detail, every shell company, every falsified transaction. He used no slideshow, no script, only his voice. Low, steady, cold. Vincent Rourke never died. Elias Kane was never guilty, and Julian Rourke, as of tonight, is operating an international money laundering ring, protected by key individuals inside our own justice system. Some in the room scoffed, others frowned. Luther didn't pause. He pressed a key, and the recordings began to play. Vincent and Julian, a staged disappearance, evidence destroyed, phantom investments, a chilling promise, make Elias vanish from this world. Silence froze the room. Then came the slam of a palm against the table. Agent Raymond Kessler, head of the Federal Financial Tracking Division, stood up, voice ringing with fury. If even half of this is true, we're not just looking at a wrongful conviction. We're looking at financial treason on a national scale. Luther nodded, slowly, deliberately. I don't need them to believe me. I need them to re-examine what Elias was accused of. And I need them to act, before Julian and Vincent disappear for real. 3 hours later, emergency arrest warrants were issued. Julian Rourke, last tracked at a luxury hotel in the Bahamas, vanished from the system without a trace. A detained bodyguard confessed. Julian had arranged a nameless flight with no passport via a private jet under a Shell partner's name. Vincent, long absent from the public eye, was discovered hiding in a secluded Alpine villa in Austria, living under an alias, his papers illegally granted by a so-called honorary consul. Meanwhile, Ava Kingsley stepped into a different kind of battle. Not in court, but on camera. She sat alone in the green room of the national news network. On her lap, a folder marked Elias Kane, Confidential. In her hand, a photo of Ranger, sleeping peacefully with his head on Elias's leg. Her eyes weren't swollen, but they were sharper than ever. The red light blinked on. Live. And Ava spoke, not from a teleprompter, not with a PR rep at her side. Just the truth and love. My name is Ava Kingsley. I'm a veterinarian, and for the past 5 years I've cared for a dog named Ranger. That dog can't speak, but he can protect, and he protected his owner, a man sentenced to death for a crime he never committed. She placed a tiny USB on the table. Inside this are audio recordings, bank records, video footage, confessions. So I ask you, if a loyal dog could carry the truth for 5 years, what about us? Do we deserve it? The broadcast spread like wildfire. Hashtags exploded. Justice for Elias. Ranger the hero dog. Expose the raw truth. Those who had stayed silent began to speak. Former Rourke Holdings employees. A juror who said she'd been nudged toward a guilty verdict. Even a young assistant prosecutor submitted his resignation with one line. We weren't led by the truth. We were fed a performance. Back at the prison hospital, Elias Kane still hadn't been cleared for release. But for the first time, he wasn't watched like a criminal. A nurse brought him the morning paper. Front page, a photo of Ranger beside Ava. The headline, Ranger, the dog who brought justice home. Elias laughed. A dry, quiet laugh, but the first in years that didn't taste like rusted iron. The door creaked open. Luther stepped in, holding a document printed on red-sealed stationery. Official order of release, he said. They're still drafting the motion to overturn the sentence. But Elias, you're free. Elias looked up. Didn't ask a thing. He only said, I didn't think I still existed in the eyes of the law. Luther smiled. You weren't alone. Outside the window, dawn broke gently over the city. And across a nation, people woke to the realization a man had been wrongfully condemned. And a dog, a woman, and a stubborn old detective had refused to let the truth be buried. Early Friday morning, national news outlets broke the headline simultaneously. Vincent Rourke arrested in Austria, extradition to the U.S. underway. He didn't resist. Didn't argue. When Interpol agents stormed the secluded chalet buried deep in the snowy Alps, Vincent simply stood, slipped into a long overcoat, looked silently out the window, then turned away. The image of him in handcuffs, silver-haired, expressionless, once the public face of an untouchable financial empire, flashed across every screen in America. Some were stunned. Others exhaled in relief. Because finally, a man who once seemed above the law had been pulled into the light. But Julian Rourke was not captured. He was now a fugitive, wanted on charges of money laundering, evidence tampering, prosecutorial bribery, and conspiracy to commit murder. 3 days after Vincent's arrest, a special ops team picked up a GPS signal, pinged from a smartwatch Julian had mistakenly left behind at a luxury resort near Florida's southern coast, dangerously close to the Cuban border. The team moved in. They surrounded the dock. Julian was preparing to board a speedboat, holding a forged passport, a duffel bag full of cash, and a pistol. "Freeze! Drop your weapon!" Julian turned, but instead of surrendering, he fired. 2 rounds from the strike team hit his shoulder and upper chest. Julian Rourke collapsed on the damp wooden planks, blood pooling beneath him. His eyes remained open, but there was nothing left for them to see. The news of his death spread fast. Some mourned. Some called it justice. But Elias Kane, upon hearing the news, said only one thing. If he had lived, I would have asked him one question. Why? 6 days later, Vincent Rourke was extradited to the United States. At JFK International Airport, he was escorted off the plane under maximum security. Camera flashes exploded. He said nothing, showed no shame, no arrogance, just a long, level stare into the lens, as if acknowledging everything. A renowned defense lawyer was appointed to represent him. At the emergency arraignment, Vincent spoke only once. I do not deny my role, but the death of truth didn't begin with me. I was merely the last man who failed to stop it. But the story didn't end with the Rourke family. The entire justice and financial system that had supported them began to crack. The state's lead prosecutor, who had authorized the indictment against Elias, was now under investigation for receiving anonymous campaign funding traced back to Julian's shadow trust. The judge who had dismissed Elias's request to submit new evidence, turns out he met privately with Rourke Holdings' legal representative just 1 week before the trial. 7 senior officials on the city's financial oversight board were summoned. 3 were suspended. 2 vanished. 1 took his own life. Ava read the news in silence, her heart heavy. She had always known their actions were wrong. But the price they were paying went beyond prison. It was reputation, family, children, everything they had built on silence, now collapsing beneath the roar of truth's return. Elias never made a public statement. Since his release, he kept a low profile. He sent handwritten letters of thanks to the legal team, to Avenue, to Luther, and to Ranger. He declined all interviews, turned down every appearance. When Luther asked him why, Elias simply replied, "I've been seen too long as a convict. Now I just want to live as a man." Ranger, the silent guardian who had carried the truth for years, was now a living legend. Animal rights groups nominated him for the Loyal Companion Medal. Children came to Ava's clinic just to pose beside the 4-legged hero. Every time a car horn startled him, Ava would laugh softly and hug him close. "You don't have to be a hero anymore," she whispered. "Now you just get to live and be loved." But deep down, every soul who had walked that road with Elias knew the same thing. Justice is not a reward. It is a war. And like all wars, it leaves behind scars, wreckage, and absences that no celebration can fill. Elias had been exonerated. The guilty had been unmasked. The system was beginning to purge. But the price of truth? Not everyone is willing to pay it. That morning, the New York sky was strangely clear, as if, after a long storm, the heavens themselves had chosen to return a sliver of peace to a man who had once been stripped of both truth and time. At exactly 10 a.m., the gates of the federal prison swung open. 2 officers escorted Elias Kane outside. No handcuffs, no prison uniform, just a man in a modest gray suit, slightly too loose on a body worn thin by 5 years behind bars. There was no commotion, no media circus. Just a few quiet onlookers, some distant cameras, and one woman, standing in sunlight, holding a trembling German shepherd, who had just caught the scent of something heartbreakingly familiar. Elias walked, not fast, not slow. He saw Ava from afar, no longer in her white lab coat like the day he first met her, just a soft beige sweater, her hair falling gently to her shoulders, and eyes that had not left him for even a second. Ranger tore free from her arms. He ran, as if there had never been distance, or cages, or courtrooms, or death sentences between them. "Ranger," Elias whispered. The dog crashed into him, buried his head against Elias's chest, and whimpered, pressing into his shoulder like he was trying to erase the invisible wounds still echoing through his master's ribs. Elias fell to his knees. He embraced him, and for the first time in 5 years, he cried, not from hatred, not from bitterness, but because, finally, a promise had been kept. Behind them, Ava stood still. She didn't move forward, didn't intrude on their reunion, just stood quietly, eyes blurred, her hand over her heart, which hadn't beat evenly for months. Elias turned to her. Ava smiled, a fragile smile, but warm. He walked toward her. Ranger stayed close by his side. She spoke first. "I promised myself I wouldn't die before seeing you walk out that gate." Elias's voice cracked. "And I once promised that if I ever made it out, the first person I'd find would be you." Ava blinked slowly. "Maybe I don't have much time left," she whispered. "But at least I've been given one more moment." 1 week later, the governor held a special press conference. Elias Kane has been officially exonerated. His name was removed from the death row registry. A new line added, "Victim of judicial misconduct and political conspiracy." The state also announced compensation. $15 million for wrongful imprisonment, $5 million for psychological trauma and damage to reputation, and a formal offer to serve on a task force for justice reform and financial corruption investigations. Elias declined. "I don't want to be a symbol," he told the press. "I don't want to be a martyr. I just want to live, like a regular man with the dog who waited, and the woman who believed in me, even when I no longer believed in myself." The country was moved. Ranger was named Life-Saving Dog of the Year. Ava refused all interview requests. She spent her remaining days quietly, caring for Elias, Ranger, and the nameless animals that came through her small clinic doors. Each night, they ate simple meals. Ranger lay in the living room, head resting on Elias's foot. Ava leaned into his shoulder. They didn't talk about time. They didn't revisit the years lost. They didn't need to. Because the present, finally, was a gift. One evening, as sunset poured over the rooftops like pale rose silk, Elias whispered, "If one day you're no longer here, what should I do with Ranger?" Ava rested her head against his chest. "Live," she said. "And tell the story, not the one about the trial, but the story of a dog who never left his master's side." The final night of March. The spring wind hadn't yet warmed, but Ava's small room still carried the familiar scent of peppermint oil, the one she always used at night to help her breathe a little easier. Elias sat beside her bed, quietly reading the last few pages of a book she had once left unfinished. Ranger lay at the foot of the bed, his chin resting on the wooden frame, eyes half-lidded, glancing toward her now and then, just to make sure she was still there. Ava had fallen asleep early that evening. No pain, no restlessness, just her hand, loosely wrapped around Elias's, like a farewell that didn't need words. When dawn slipped gently through the cracks of the curtain, Elias awoke to a silence that felt complete. No steady breathing beside him. No warm hand resting on his chest, like it did every morning since they'd come home. Ava still lay there, her face serene, eyes closed gently, as if lost in a dream she no longer needed to wake from. Ranger had been awake for a while, but he didn't bark. He didn't paw or whine. He simply stayed there, head resting on the same spot at the foot of the bed, just as he had done every single day since they returned to each other. Elias didn't cry. He simply sat down, held her hand, one last time. No sobbing, no tears, just silence, full, final, and whole. A silent thank you to the one who had walked with him to the very end, without fear, without retreat. The memorial was simple. It was held in the garden behind her clinic, where Ava once planted purple flowers and built tiny shelters for stray cats in winter. Not many people came. No one spoke loudly. Just Elias, Luther, a few old colleagues, and people who had once brought animals to her, all standing quietly, hands over hearts, heads bowed low. Ranger lay by the small grave, unmoving. People said he didn't eat for 3 days, didn't sleep, just lay there, head on the fresh soil. Elias didn't stop him. He didn't try to coax him away, because he knew every loyal soul needs time to say goodbye. On the 3rd night, Elias sat beside him. He ran a hand gently over Ranger's dark, damp fur, tangled slightly from mist and rain. "You stayed with me longer than I thought you would." Ranger lifted his head. His eyes, clouded with age, still held that same unwavering light, the way he had always looked at Elias from the very beginning, without question, without demand, without condition. Elias lowered his head. He didn't cry, just pressed his forehead against Ranger's, his hand still stroking slowly. "She's gone, but I still have you, and I still have stories to tell. To those who don't believe, to those who haven't seen." A week later, Elias returned to the city. Not as a symbol, not as a survivor of injustice, as the headlines once called him. Just a man. A man carrying a dog, a box of ashes, and a worn leather notebook. Inside it were the names of every person who helped him. What he learned during his years in prison, Ava's last words before sleep. Places Ranger had taken him that he had never noticed before. No one knew what Elias would do next. Some said he started a legal aid center for the wrongfully convicted. Others said he was writing, not for fame, but so those who had been silenced could find their voices again. But wherever he went, whatever he chose. His mornings always began with the sound of coffee brewing. Beside him, Ranger, older now, slower, but still there, just like the very first day. And on the wall of the living room, a small wooden frame. Ava, hair down, hand gently resting on Ranger's back, eyes looking toward Elias, as if still watching, still smiling, and still saying, "Keep living, because I waited for the day you'd come home." 1 year after being exonerated, Elias Kane left the city. He didn't vanish. He didn't run away. He simply chose, quietly, a different place. Far from sirens, headlines, and the cold steel walls of the prison that once tried to erase him. A small town in Vermont, where mist rolls over the fields each morning, and the sunlight never shines too harsh. There, he built something he had never dared to dream of his whole life. Clear Paws. The name wasn't his idea. It was Ava's. She once said to him, on a cold winter night, "If you're ever free, build a place where no one has to bark just to be heard. Call it Clear Paws, Clean Footprints, Quiet Hope." Elias never forgot that. Now it had become a symbol of healing. Clear Paws was made of 2 branches. A legal unit, where Elias and a group of volunteer attorneys reopened and investigated overlooked wrongful convictions, cases forgotten because the people inside had no means left to fight, and a canine-assisted therapy center for those with emotional trauma, former inmates, war veterans, and children growing up in grief-stricken homes. Many of the dogs had once been abandoned. Now they were trained to listen, accompany, and quietly heal. Ranger, though old and slower now, remained the unofficial head trainer. Every morning, Elias would walk him around the grounds. Formerly voiceless men and women, once silenced by courtrooms, now sat on benches, stroking his thick gray fur, reading books aloud, or speaking truths they had never dared tell another soul. Ranger didn't respond. He didn't have to. He just pressed his body gently into their laps, looked up, and somehow that was enough. Back in New York, Luther Briggs didn't retire, as everyone expected. Instead, he used his entire compensation from the wrongful suspension lawsuit to establish the AVA Institute, an independent investigative center, unaffiliated with government, built to review cases at risk of corruption, misconduct, or wrongful conviction. Its logo was a single violet flower. At the center, a ring resembling a dog's collar. At the opening, Luther spoke simply. "This isn't here to replace justice. It's here to remind it not to fall asleep." ClearPaws and the AVA Institute soon joined forces. Every month, they shared data, reviewed joint cases, sometimes even solving cold cases that had sat forgotten for over a decade. And every time someone walked free, a new photo of Ranger was pinned to the wall of hope inside ClearPaws. Ranger couldn't run anymore. But whenever someone came out of the appeal room with shattered eyes and shoulders full of despair, Elias would gently point to the dog lying by the window. "He waited for me for 5 years. No one believed him. No one even asked him to. But he stayed. And if there's still someone, man or dog, waiting for you like that, then this fight isn't over." People often asked Elias, "You once had everything and lost it all. What do you have left now?" He never gave a direct answer. Instead, he'd lead them to the garden behind the center, where 3 small graves stood side by side. One for Ava, marked, "She believed," even when she wasn't sure. One for Elias's mother, whom he never met, inscribed, "For those who never got to tell their story." And to the left, a blank one, with a small wooden sign, "Reserved for Ranger, the silent hero." Ranger passed away that autumn. No pain, no illness, just fell asleep in Elias's lap, like he did on the very first day they met in that animal shelter, back when they were both unwanted, unseen, and silent. At the burial, no one cried. Only the wind was still. Elias stroked his head one last time and whispered, "Thank you. You don't have to do anything anymore. I'll tell the rest of the story to the world." And he did. Not through books, not through film, but by living every single day as if loyalty were a religion, a summer afternoon on Vermont's eastern coast. The sunlight spread like honey across the water, and the breeze carried the laughter of children across the white sand, soft as whispers. Elias Kane sat cross-legged on a large blanket, wearing a simple button-down shirt, gently drawing circles in the sand with a wooden stick. Around him sat a group of children. One cradled a stuffed animal, another stroked the soft fur of a young therapy dog from the ClearPaws program. No cameras, no script, just a story circle by the sea. Something Elias had done once a month. Today was the first time Ranger wasn't there. But Ranger's old collar, worn leather, a tarnished brass tag engraved "Ranger," rested beside Elias on a cushion, as if the dog was still lying there, patiently waiting for his turn to speak. "Have any of you ever heard of a hero who didn't say a word?" Elias began, his voice low and warm. The children leaned in, wide-eyed. He didn't wear a cape. He had no superpowers. He just had 4 legs, a heart that knew how to wait, and a gaze that no one could turn away from. Elias told the story of a man wrongly accused, of long nights in silence, of a dog once rescued from a brutal shelter, who in turn rescued that man not just once, but for a lifetime. The children didn't ask, "Why didn't the dog run away?" Or, Why did the world believe the wrong people? They just sat quietly, their eyes fixed on the collar beside Elias, as if they understood, deeply. One boy named Milo, who had been bullied at school, whispered, "I wish I had a friend like that." Elias smiled, ruffling his hair. "Maybe you don't have one yet, but you can become a friend like that." As the storytelling ended, the sun was slipping into the ocean's edge. Elias stood, turned toward the sea, and pulled a small cloth pouch from his pocket, the last ashes of Ranger. He opened it and scattered the dust into the wind. The ashes danced, faded, as if Ranger was never just one dog, but a breath of loyalty itself, impossible to lose. A little girl asked softly, "What was his name?" Elias answered gently, "His name was Ranger." But he didn't really need a name, because when you look into a dog's eyes, you'll know. They stay, even when the world leaves. When everyone had gone, Elias remained alone. He sat back down, fingers gently tracing the collar once more, slow, reverent, as if warmth still clung to it. The sunset flared in a streak of crimson across the horizon. Then Elias spoke, just above a whisper, as if to the waves or to a soul still listening. "Truth can be buried, justice can be sold, but the loyalty of a dog never fades, so live in a way that honors the gaze of someone who never stopped believing in you." The story of Elias, Ava, and Ranger was never just about clearing a name. It was about the quiet strength of love, the resilience of loyalty, and the bond between a human and a dog that needed no explanation. We live in a world that moves fast, judges quickly, forgets easily, and forgives slowly. But a dog, especially a German shepherd with unwavering loyalty, silent courage, and quiet love, can teach us what many people never will: to wait without conditions, to protect without applause, to love without needing a reason. Ranger didn't save Elias with a bark. He saved him with his eyes, with a loyalty that didn't blink, even when the whole world turned away. And maybe, for each of us, there will come a moment when all we need is a gaze like that, from someone, or from a creature who waits in silence. May this story inspire you to slow down, to love animals more freely, and to cherish the quiet companions who carry whole oceans of devotion without ever saying a word. And if you ever wonder whether unconditional love is real, just look into the eyes of a dog. You'll know the answer.